So the title of our presentation today is What Now? Near-Death Experiences and Their Integration, Relationships and Their Challenges. So the way through my own research, whether it's on IANDS web pages or other web pages, or reading or listening to audiobooks and other presentations regarding near-death experiences, to me, it seems like there are basically three versions. The 1.0 version of you that's before the NDE, life is normal, right? And then there's the reboot, where you have the NDE itself and you become realigned in your moral compass, your GPS, as I said, was kind of reset, because now you're going to navigate differently than you did before. And then you have the upgraded version that follows, the version 2.0. And it's been said that for some people, this period lasts 7 to 10 years. I think for me, it lasts a lifetime, because, and you wonder, like I said, where's the manual for the upgrade? Where's the phone number to customer support? But basically, how does one integrate the NDE into one's outer life, if you will, as I call coping? And so, quick overview of NDEs is, and this is a common statistic, both found on IANDS pages and some of the more popular ones out there. A conservative estimate is that 5% of the world has had a near-death experience. That's 60 million more people than live in the United States. So we're talking about, 380, 390 million people, which is a sizable population. And in terms of a baseline of an NDE, we do have a lot of the common attributes of moving through a tunnel, seeing dead loved ones and angelic beings, feelings of spiritual transcendence. A life review is very common as well. And then there's an expanded perspective on purpose and meaning of life. And then when we come back, is again, working our way into back into the world, if you will, I would say we have divergence on 3 different levels, where you basically realize you've been removed from the herd and things aren't the same now as they were before. And so as we do have some of those similarities of like the tunnel, the dead loved ones and all that, as common as those are, experiencers report all the same that their NDE seem to be tailor-made to them personally, which sounds like it'd be a different story for everyone without the statistically significant commonalities. So I find that interesting, that it is where you start to realize how individual your experience was. And then as time goes on, you start to see some after effects, maybe physically things change, maybe your vision changes, your sense of smell changes, your sense of touch, your electrical sensitivity, things like this, emotional sensitivity as well. You might even, as PMH Atwater said, if you weren't psychic before, you will be after. If you were psychic, you might be more so after. But you also realize, you become more spiritually inclined. And so it's really interesting to start to wake up every day asking, is what was true yesterday still true today? As you realize you are birthing, if you will, into a new person. And then, of course, there's the social aspects, how these changes all come together to change our relationship with everyone and everything around us. Personal, professional, could be religious, familial, societal, everything gets touched by this experience because you change. And then, as I call it, an end state divergence, which could just mean ongoing throughout life, an emerging version of ourselves reacts to the world in new ways because we are experiencing ourselves differently. And we do see the world through our own filters, right? And then our experience may be difficult for others to accept in a meaningful way without common frames of reference or an established vocabulary. And that's a big part of the integration process. And we do hear commonly how there's just no words to describe it. And if someone hasn't had that experience, it's going to be really hard to explain. It's hard to explain surfing to someone, to an Inuit living in Alaska. And it's hard to talk about hunting on the ice to someone who surfs waves in Hawaii. So there are 2 common examples right there. So for me, some questions of coping and support in terms of after an NDE, understanding how people change and relationships change. This includes, again, friendships, jobs, churches, and even marriages. And when I did my initial research on, what happened to me, it was a near-death experience, I found a statistic on the IANDS page, and I've seen it reproduced in other sites that talked about how NDEs have divorce rates of between 65% to 78%. which is far above the national average of 41 to 50%. And you have to ask, of that 41 to 50% of what we could call normal people divorces, you wonder how many of those may be unidentified with a root cause as a near-death experience or a spiritually transformative experience. So that to me adds to the significance of that big statistic for NDEs. Also, NDEs are more easily able to integrate their NDE as a constructive event when their significant others accept and honor what they've been through, when there's some validation. And as NDEs grow in qualities that should enhance relationships, their profound changes may actually leave significant others feeling abandoned. So for all that additional empathy we get, it's really strange to feel that we are walking a more solitary path. But a lot of people do discuss that. Some key components are, effective communication. That's going to be key, I think, in trying to either keep any relationship you can together or trying to navigate your way through it, hopefully with the idea that it can remain intact. But if it can't, then it can't. But effective communication all around is important. And in some relationships, normal conflict is inevitable. People are always having to, negotiate a compromise. And that's the space in between the polarities of it's my way or no way, right? And then, in the post NDE, positions are going to change, and we need to reconfirm our evolving positions. And so sometimes things we thought were settled become brand new conversations all over again. You reconfirm your hopes, your dreams, your desires, your fears, might even your prejudices, right? Or how you want to raise your children, or where your next vacation will be. A lot of your values have changed now. So a lot of what you want to do with your time and your significant others in life will change as well. And then in terms of discovery, mutual understanding of the symbolic meaning underlying each partner's perspective on the problem is key. And understanding constant or changing reference points. And that's what I mean by the symbolism. We are symbols to each other. When we first meet and have relationships, the first three questions we ask is who's important, who's an enemy, and who's irrelevant. And as we discover, the importance of one person to another, that's when deeper relationships might form. So in terms of spousal relationships or significant other relationships, again, there's a symbolism of who we are to each other and what our actions mean to each other in terms of our commonalities of our hopes and our dreams. That all can change. And in terms of counseling, here's a question. How could an NDE knowledgeable therapist make a difference in the outcome of a relationship that's coming to grips with such an event? In terms of assisting the experiencer spouse to orient themselves within the stages of integration, and then helping the non-experiencer spouse to support and accept their NDE spouse's changes in perspectives. That's at the root of effective communication, is the appreciation and the validation of each other's viewpoints. So in terms of the implications for non-experiencers, NDEs have difficulty reconciling differences because of the change in fundamental values that underlay a lack of acceptance and understanding from their relationships. That's where the challenge is. Most NDEs report they feel less accepted and understood in their relationships following their NDEs. This is the common reason people will say, well, I never talked about this because I didn't want people to think I was crazy. I didn't want to throw me out of the church. I didn't want to see my marriage blow up. So obviously there's a disconnect there in terms of our acceptance in our traditional relationships. And this definitely correlates with marital adjustment and marital stability. So at this time, as we talk about implications for counselors, I want to toss over to Diana. And Diana, I'll be happy to toggle the slides for you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I want to share that this information that I'm going to share is based on not only my personal experience, my own spiritual experience, but is also based on my practice, my private practice for many years, working with near-death experiencers and the after effects, maybe about more than 200 people, and also based on information that I have learned from IANDS, from ACISTE, which is the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences. That being said, I want to add that it's very important. I actually feel very strongly that it should be part of the curriculum for therapists to add this information, this knowledge, because when I've seen a lot of people get hurt by going to someone who's not knowledgeable of these experiences and the implications. So the first, I'm going to ask a question. How can a counselor or a therapist and the experiencer who is trying to make sense of an apparent nonsensical experience within the therapeutic setting? The first thing I want to say is for the therapist to listen with compassion, with love, with understanding, with an open mind, an open heart, and absolutely free from judgments, regardless of your religious or spiritual values or lack of. One thing that is extremely important is to validate the experience and all its implications, regardless of your values. And of course, use a client-centered approach, okay? No one size fits all, that I know for a fact. The integration process and the desired outcomes are highly individualized. The integration process of this experience is a dynamic process which is continually being negotiated, continually being evaluated, and is managed by the individual with a variety of situations. Like in Jim's case, you know, if I may say, in relationships, that's a big one. I want to share information from an online survey done by ACISTE with 50 experiencers, and 12% of these experiences responded that no one can ever truly integrate these experiences into their lives. That was 12%. The integration process, one thing that I have to say is, oh, Jim, could you please go to the next one? Thank you. Okay. Is there are promoting and inhibiting factors for the integration of these experiences. One of them is how well is the sharing of the experience with not only the significant others, but friends, doctors, the church. That's a huge one. And another one is, what is the physical and emotional and mental health of the individual at the time of having the experience? The reason being is I have seen a lot of people who prior to having the experience, they had trauma. And if they had a very beautiful, uplifting experience, it's harder for them to integrate their experience, to accept their return. It could be very painful. The experiences, the life situation of the person. Are they stable financially, or the intensity of the after effects? Some of the after effects could be very, very intense. And also the manner in which the experience and the experiencer was returned. The integration of the therapeutic in the therapeutic setting is, like I said before, is a dynamic process. But the one thing that I want to add, that most people want to achieve peace of mind and fear, free from fear or any type of anxiety. They want to feel safe and comfortable in most situations. What situations? Marriage sometimes have challenges as a result of that. Relationships with children, with spouses. I have seen in my own private practice spouses that don't understand that the experiencer experiences love for everyone and they feel threatened. So that's a huge challenge. Also, they want to feel comfortable in their job. If they have a job being, for example, in the military or being a police officer, they don't want to come back doing the same job. So oftentimes they change jobs to something of service to people. Now, Jim, could you please go to the next slide? Okay. So again, talking about the desire of states of mind and attitudes that experiences want to achieve. Okay. Accepting the return, that's a big one. That's a huge one, because if someone has had a very profound, uplifting experience, it's hard for them to come back. Oftentimes they become homesick, so much to the point that they get depressed. Sometimes there is substance abuse issues as a result of that. Now, issues relating the experience, that's a big one. If the person that they share it initially gets scared or is judgmental, they really, really have a hard time. And oftentimes they shut down and they do not talk about the experience for decades. And sometimes this has very serious consequences in the person. Healthy relationships, that's something everyone wants to achieve. They want to be able to have their spouse understand not only the experience, but what they're experiencing, the implications of their experience. That makes a huge difference. And in terms of how a therapist could help, the therapist could help the spouse of the experiencer accept and understand what their spouse is going through. It would make a huge difference in the process of their spouse's integration. Now, integrating the spiritual values with earthly expectations, that's a hard one, because oftentimes people come back rewired in so many ways. So once they have that new paradigm, it's very difficult for some people to relate in many aspects with their jobs, with their children, with their friends, with their religion, with their church. I've seen many people be excommunicated from their church that they've gone to for so many years after sharing this very intimate, personal, precious experience. So that's another aspect they want to integrate. Changes in attitudes towards careers and money. Again, as I mentioned before, oftentimes, depending on their careers that they had prior to the experience, they want to change to something more of service. They want to do something that is for their life purpose, and it takes a long time to figure that out. As far as money, I have seen people who have been very wealthy, and they decide, because of their new values, to give it away to the poor, to donate it, to give everything away. And that causes serious problems with their spouses who don't understand that. Changes in attitudes towards death. Again, well, people, for the most part, lose the fear of death. That's a huge one. And for those who have this experience as a result of committing suicide, oftentimes, even though they yearn for going to go back home, they stop themselves from doing it because they understand that there is a purpose, that there is a reason to be here. And so they don't do that. Again, finding life purpose, that's a big one. And oftentimes people really struggle with that. And sometimes it takes many years when they are sometimes told it's time for you to go back. You have a purpose, you have a mission. Well, what is my mission? And that takes a long time to find out and to process. Jim, can I have the next one, please? Okay, this is a huge one, coping with invalidation. There is a very serious concern that I have seen is for people that go to, that share the experience with a doctor, an MD, or a psychiatrist, or a therapist, and they end up being pathologized or given a diagnosis for a mental illness. That causes a lot of hardship. Sometimes they're given medication. I have seen people actually being hospitalized, like they're having a mental breakdown. They're being psychotic. This is very serious. I really feel very strongly that part of the curriculum for health professionals, that it should be part of the curriculum to learn about these experiences. Now, the issue of ineffability, that's a big one. How do you explain and express something for which there are no words to express in the English language or in any language? That's one of the things that is very difficult for experiencers. And oftentimes, because it's so hard to put words to these precious, intimate experiences, that they decide to just keep the information to themselves for decades. And as a result, they end up feeling depressed, alienated, or isolated, despite the fact that this knowledge is out there, it's in the media, it's in movies, IANDS is doing an amazing job. You'll be surprised how many people have not heard of these experiences. So that's a big one. So how do you integrate these new spiritual values with an earthly values that everyone has? That's a tough one. And that's something that people often want to integrate in therapy, which, it takes a long time. And sometimes, like I mentioned before, people never get to, it's a lifetime process of integrating these experiences in somebody's life. One thing that people want to achieve is balance emotionally, mentally. People want to feel whole, grounded, centered, and able to live effectively with one foot here and the other one there. Believe it or not, it's a dichotomy. You want to be in the here and now, but at the same time, for some people, it's hard to be completely here because they have one foot on the other side. To become very loving and compassionate, that happens to a lot of people initially. I have to add, for those who have a difficult experience, either a hellish or painful experience, sometimes they don't share the experience for fear that they are going to, be judged. Fortunately, many of these experiences end up being very positive. And for the ones who don't have that, even then, oftentimes they lose the fear of death. Another thing people want to achieve is accepting that not everyone is ready to hear the experience. Not everyone wants to hear that. Not everyone wants to hear their new values. So it's important. That's something that they want to achieve. They want to become joyful and peaceful. And one that is very important, to have happy, healthy relationships. And of course, it helps when the spouse or the significant other is accepting of the significant other's experience and the after effects. And another one is to become financially stable. Okay. I remember clearly one of the first people that I ever met who had a profound near-death experience. He was a big CEO in an advertising company. And after he came back from that experience, the first thing he did was to give up that job. Even though he was making a lot of money, he was very powerful. And he gave everything away because he felt completely unattached to material possessions. He ended up getting a divorce as a result of that. But he had a really hard time trying to figure what to do with his life, what kind of, trying to figure out what was his purpose. He knew he wanted to make a difference in the world, but he just didn't know how to do that. Do we have another slide, Jim?
Yes, we have the summary slide. At this time, I just wanted to invite those who are with us, if you want to use the Q&A feature in the interface, you can type in any questions you want, and we'll take them when we wrap up, which will be very soon.
One thing that I want to add, which is very important, dealing with the invalidation is one of the toughest things that I have seen experiencers go through. And sometimes the issue with sharing the experience with somebody who either dismissed them, ridicules them, or otherwise walks away is extremely frustrating, but is very painful for the experiencer. So I just wanted to add that. And again, the concern about people being pathologized. I've seen people be hospitalized, given medication. So I wanted to bring this up. Thank you. So Jim, do you want to talk about the summary?
Sure. Let me just bring my video back up. So yeah, in terms of trying to wrap this up into a ball, we could summarize our presentation today and what we've seen and what we wanted to share with you, that NDEs change values and or their associations lack of acceptance will cause a resentment of their level of commitment to the relationships. It's kind of hard to want to stay on a sinking ship, and obviously we're already feeling called to look in other directions based on the power of our experience. Mental health professionals who are knowledgeable of these experiences and their after effects may be able to help NDEs integrate their experiences into their lives. That's the whole premise of our talk today. And some NDEs express feelings of grief related to the loss of connection to their spouses, even though they know they can no longer be married to them. And as a result, as their relationships dissolve in the aftermath of those experiences, they might benefit from grief counseling, much like you would from the death of someone. The death of a relationship is like the death of a person. So that leaves us with the big question of can a counselor who is unfamiliar with the NDEs have the needed insight to fundamentally assist the NDE in their integration? That answer could be, I'd say it's maybe, and it really depends. The counselors I saw until I met Diana, I probably talked to 3 or 4 of them, including a marriage counselor. And I'd say I came out worse than I went in. So my, the guy in the trenches opinion would be, if you can't find a counselor who can validate your NDE or validate that you think you had an NDE, run. Don't walk out of their office. It's better to have no therapy than bad therapy. So let me just see here. I put this statement in here, so I'd like to be able to read it. The death of a spouse is a terribly stressful event for an individual, but the near death of a spouse is the most stressful event for a marriage. And this, I believe, 78% of us could say is true. And the 22% who survived it probably would have something to add as well. So here is our slide with some of our sources and references we drew from today. I mean, Diana certainly has her experience, but this actually gives a little bit more of a foundation to what we shared with you today. And our very last slide is, and thanks for your time and joining us today with the contact information for both Diana and myself.